Hi guys, welcome to the True Mouse Games YouTube channel. In this video we'll be talking about the internet phenomenon known as Critical Role. Probably the most popular role-playing campaign of all time. It ended about a month ago, I think. And in this video we'll be talking about what you can learn from watching Critical Role, you as a game master and you as a player, of course. Now, for those of you who don't know what Critical Role is, I have put a link in the description underneath the video that will take you to the first episode of Critical Role. But basically it is a D&D campaign based in Los Angeles, played on Geek and Sundry's Twitch stream. And it is a pretty long D&D campaign. It's been running for about 5 years, I think. The Game Master is Matthew Mercer, a voice actor and one of the greatest Game Masters that I have personally ever seen. And his whole cast is also a bunch of nerdy-ass voice actors. It's a pretty damn good game, in my opinion. I've started watching around episode 4 or 5, when I caught a rebroadcast by accident, pretty much, and when they were still running around the Underdark fighting Durgar and such. And I've had the honor of becoming a member of this, the whole community that has started forming around the cast of Critical Role, and I have to say that it's one of the kindest, one of the most passionate internet communities I have personally ever seen. It's been a great honor interacting with so many people from this community. Now, if you have been watching Critical Role, you probably have picked up dozens, maybe hundreds of things subconsciously while watching many hours of Critical Role. Even for more experienced game masters and players, there's still a plenty of things you can learn from Critical Role. Not just because Matt's a great game master, it's also because him and all the players have acting experience. And, well, they are professional actors after all, so they do a lot of things subconsciously, or nearly subconsciously, I suppose, that serve to make the game a better experience for everyone involved, well, also for us, the viewers, as such. There's a lot of things you can learn from Critical Role, but in this video I will be focusing on 5 main things that I've picked up for myself. Number 1, and this might seem a bit of a no-brainer for most people, but it certainly wasn't for me. And number 1 is a game is great if all the players are also really good friends. All of us who have seen Critical Role have enjoyed and kind of being part of the amazing chemistry between all the players and the Game Master, of course. Especially, say, Liam and Laura, they're like siblings in real life, right? Even though they are not related, but because their characters are twins, there's this amazing connection there. And also Grog and Scanlan and all these connections that the cast has formed, or Keyleth and Percy, because Taliesin and Marisha have been good friends in real life, and their real life chemistry shapes the chemistry of their characters to an amazing extent. Now, as I said, it might be a bit of a no-brainer for people, realizing that people who are good friends outside of the game will also have a lot of fun playing together in the game. But for me, I have been running games with a lot of people on the internet, games with also a lot of people here locally that I don't know that well, and I have tended to pick out more experienced players as such, people who I would consider good players, so to speak, and ran campaigns with them. And while they've all been really good experiences, sometimes there's been some trouble between characters and between players, and I personally never had a group that felt like all the characters really liked each other, which is mostly due to the fact that I suppose the people playing, while they were friends certainly, they were never super close friends. So number 1 of the things we can learn from Critical Role is basically don't worry about how experienced a player is, how good a player is, how good people are at, doing voices and making plans and tactics and so on. If you like your players and your players like you and each other, pretty much no matter what you do, you'll have a really good time. The second point we can learn from Critical Role is to share the spotlight. Now, I have already mentioned that the cast and the Game Master in Critical Role all have acting training. So they are very aware of how to pull other players, other characters into the spotlight. Liam is especially good at that. Watching Critical Role, many of you probably have realized that, because he often says, I walk up to this character and I ask him or her something, and that action that Liam has taken, or Vax'ildan has taken, I suppose I should say, has brought us some of the greatest moments and some of the greatest dialogues in the whole of Critical Role. But you can do that without acting training as well. Just make sure not to hog the spotlight as a player, but also to share the spotlight, to set other players up for success with their characters. Give them time to shine, play off each other's strengths and weaknesses. As a game master, you can definitely do your part to encourage that spotlight sharing and to generally also shine the spotlight upon this character and then that character and then that character, so no one feels left out. And how do you do that? Well, it's actually not that difficult. Firstly, if you have overbearing players that tend to hog the spotlight, take them aside and ask them to take it easy a bit, especially if you have an experienced player in a group of newbies. That could very easily happen, and you don't want one player's fun to overshadow the other player's enjoyment of the game. Another simple technique as the Game Master is to use your players' backstories, or your characters' backstories, I suppose, and bring them into the story. All of you know the Briarwoods arc, which is Percy's story in Critical Role, basically. And while he was very quiet during the Underdark arc, and I personally didn't notice him much while I was watching, on my first watch anyway, during the Briarwood arc, he certainly came to the forefront and really stole the show from everyone involved. And that's sort of thing that can happen in all our games as well. If people give you tools to threaten their characters, tools from the past of their characters to push their characters into the spotlight, make sure you use them, and make sure you use them more or less equally, of course, assuming that everyone has given you these tools. And if not, then go up to your players and ask them individually, what parts of your backstory do you think could still come back to haunt you? Or similar things. But that's generally not a big problem, because most people in their character backstories have like really bad things that happen to their family, to their friends, to their village, and so on, which you can use fairly easily to create adventures and plots. The third thing we can learn from watching Critical Role is something that differs between Matt's games and my games. Generally, our GMing styles are fairly similar in a lot of ways, I think. But there is one thing that Matt does that I don't do as much, although I have started doing it a little more recently because I've learned from Matt. And that thing is to make the player characters heroes, to push them or pull them or make them be the center part of the story. In Matt's world, even though it doesn't seem like that most of the times, because Matt is very skilled at concealing that, everything evolves around the player characters. Nothing really big ever happens without the player characters being present. And most things that do happen have someone from their past or some of their friends or allies or enemies involved. In my games, I go for more of a feeling of verisimilitude. The world turns no matter what the players do, or their characters do, and the characters need to find a way to fit in. I sometimes forget, in my desire to show a realistic world of verisimilitude, that the players are, of course, the stars of the story. And sometimes in my games, player fun tends to suffer slightly because of the verisimilitude, which is not something generally that everyone else should really try to emulate. It is definitely a style of my games, and I don't think I'll ever go completely away from that, because that's just my personal GMing style. But for most people, it's probably not too sensible to follow me down that path, to be perfectly honest. Not all the way, anyway. Matt does a lot of things, uses the rule of cool, and shapes the world around the players so that the game is the right level of challenging. Not too challenging, not too easy, of course, so that he can make the player characters heroes, the main heroes, not just heroes, in fact. Give your players success when they earn it. That doesn't mean you can never punish them. As you know, the Chroma Conclave arc started with a pretty major setback for Vox Machina, the player characters in Critical Role. And that was something they couldn't really avoid. That was one of the few ways the world happened to them without them having a chance to stop it, basically. And these things are definitely possible. The players weren't too happy about it, I suppose, but they still enjoyed it in some way, because those dark moments make the bright moments, the victories, the successes, shine even more by contrast. Fourth part, and one of the main things you can learn for Critical Role is, if you are passionate about the game will improve. Look at the cast's reactions to things that Matt does. They treat the game as something extremely important to them. They let the game affect them, not just their characters, but them, especially. Laura and Marisha are great at that. If you look at Laura's reactions and Marisha's reactions, they're extremely passionate. You can see that in nearly every single one of their reactions. Their surprise, their anger, their sadness, their defeat, their victories. There is an extreme commitment to the game, coming from both the Game Master, Matt, and his players. You remember Travis when Grog was turned into a statue? It was a fun moment, but it was also signifying a lot of commitment to the act, so to speak. Liam's, well, I'm trying not to spoil too much in this video, in case people still want to watch it after they have seen the video. But let's just say there's quite a few scenes involving Laura and Liam and Marisha, and, well, their characters, that got quite emotional, and where you could see that everyone was really committed, emotionally committed to the game, including Matt, the Game Master, of course, because a Game Master in these things always leads the way. So if you're passionate about the game, this passion will hopefully light a fire within your players as well and make them as passionate or even more passionate about the game than you are. And the more passion there is, to a specific extent, of course, the greater your game will become. The fifth point is a little bit up for discussion. It's something that I noticed, not necessarily something that I strictly learned from Critical Role, but certainly a way of thinking that I started going towards, inspired by Critical Role. Inspired most specifically by Matt's "How do you want to do this?" what a technique that he uses every time a player character gets the killing blow on a boss or any other strong opponent. He basically asks the players to describe the killing blow. And this is an exception, really. Generally, you will see in Critical Role, and also in my games, I've been doing this in a very similar matter for many years, although I haven't used "How do you want to do this?" as such. The narrative focus is split between the Game Master and the players. The players narrate their actions, or their characters' actions, if there are no dice involved, and they describe what they are doing. In combat, and really any time there's dice involved, the Game Master takes over the focus of description. So if someone, say Grog, attacks an enemy with an axe, and Travis rolls the dice, and he strikes and he deals damage, Matt describes the blow. He says, "Oh, you shoulder tackled the guy and then smash your axe into his side, ribs are cracking, and he screams out in pain, but he's still fighting on." This is something that Matt does. At the "How do you want to do this?" moments, he shifts the narrative focus onto, say, Travis. If Travis gets the killing blow on a boss enemy, Matt asks him to describe that blow. So Travis now has narrative power and can control what exactly happens with his blow, up to an extent, of course. So there is a strict difference between rolling and then describing the actions, because that the Game Master usually does that, and narrative actions as such. I mean, Laura's bathtub scene, for instance, that's something she described, she came up with. That was improvisational theater, basically, as Liam pointed out quite a few times, and you just go with that since someone does that. There's no roles. The Game Master doesn't usually interfere and say, "Nope, that's not happening," as such. A good Game Master doesn't anyway, except for those situations where the players go way too far. So what I was starting to think about is, what are other ways to shift this focus between players and Game Masters? How do you get your players, or how do you allow your players to take on the narrative focus without taking away the control from the Game Master too much in specific scenes, of course. I don't really have answers to this specific question, but it is something that I've definitely started to think about more and more as I have continued watching Critical Role. But if you have any answers, if you have techniques to share, if you have things that you do in your games or your game master does in your games, please let me know. I would love to hear your thoughts on the issue. So what do you think about Critical Role? Did you like it? Why didn't you? Why did you? Who was your favorite character? And what were things you learned or your gaming group learned from Critical Role that I haven't mentioned in this video? I'm sure there are tons of things. If you liked our content, as always, subscribe to our YouTube channel. There will be a button appearing somewhere up here or maybe somewhere up here. And we'll be running one-shots and games in D&D and many other systems in the future. If you feel like becoming part of any of those games, please let me know and we'll find a way to make that happen. We'll also talk a lot about different game mastering techniques. So especially if you're a slightly more experienced game master, I'm hoping that this channel has quite a bit of interesting content for you. And as always, until we see each other again, True Mouse Games says good night, good luck with your own games, and have a nice one. Bye-bye.